Hey guys, today I wanted to talk about a subject which is not focused in the international media and is barely talked about. We all know what happened with Bashar Assad. He is a video game addict, his wife Asma is having a good time in Dubai, his children study in Russia, and he recently received the death penalty by the Syrian court recently. All is good, we all know that. But did we actually make a proper research on how the Assad family came to power, or even how they kept the regime? Well, today I want to answer that. Before we begin our actual subject, we need to actually look at the country of Syria itself. After its independence in 1946 up until 1970, Syria had 8 military coups. But who actually led them? Well, many of them had different ideologies. Some supported Abdel Nasser, the president of Egypt. Some opposed him, and others opposed certain policies, up until a political party called the Ba'ath Party emerged in Syrian politics. Now, about this party. This party was led primarily by Salah al-Din al-Bitar and Michel Aflaq, who studied in Europe of the 1940s. On the party's agenda were 3 main pillars. Socialism, which supported the sorts of revolution like what was witnessed in the Soviet Union. Arab nationalism, which partly inspired by Italian fascism and German Nazism. And freedom, not of the individual, but of the Arab collective. In its peak in the 1960s, the Arab Ba'ath Party had a branch in almost every Arab country. In Saudi Arabia, in Lebanon, in Yemen, in Egypt, in Sudan. But the branches of the Ba'ath Party were the strongest in Iraq and in Syria. Those who joined mostly to the Ba'ath Party were either students who wanted to change their country, criminals who wanted a sense of belonging somewhere, and military officers who wanted to get involved in politics. And one of them was someone who ended the constant coups and wanted to bring an order to Syrian politics. Buckle up, because we will meet with the Syrian dictator, Hafez Assad. Hafez Assad was born in Kardaha, a village in the western mountains of Syria, in 1930, and he actually came from the bottom of Syrian society at that time. Though he was the 9th son of Ali Assad, he was the first in the family to receive formal education, and that's when he actually joined the Ba'ath Party. After he graduated from high school, he joined the Syrian Air Force. While still in the army, he rose quickly in the ranks of the Ba'ath Party, so far that in 1966, he was the second most powerful man in Syria, second to Salah Jadid. What's important to know is that he married with a woman named Anissa Makhlouf, a family from the prominent Makhlouf tribe, and together they had 5 children, but we will get to that later. In the end of the 1960s, a struggle emerged between Salah Jadid and Hafez Assad, and Jadid tells to Assad in the conference of the Ba'ath Party leadership that he should resign. Assad immediately tells his closest men, and they commit a counter-coup in November 30th, 1970.
نتجه إلى المستقبل بأمل وثقة وأن نسير على دربه بخطوات ثابتة نحو النصر ونحو تحقيق أهداف أمتنا في الوحدة والحرية والاشتراكية. أتمنى لكم التوفيق والنجاح وأرجو لكم تحقيق ما يعقده الشعب على هذا المجلس من آمال، المجد والنصر للأمة العربية والخلود لشهدائه الأبرار. والسلام عليكم.
One of the greatest riddles in the Middle East and among the researchers of Syria is, how did Assad keep the regime intact? Well, in the book of Moshe Maoz, Assad Political Biography, it can be summarized in 3 major steps he did as he took power. The first, that he put in key positions his most trusted men from every part of Syrian society: Sunni Muslims, Alawites, Druze, Christians that were associated with him through the Ba'ath Party or through the Syrian army. And then the circles of the security forces around Hafez Assad were increased and the regime was protected. The second step was to give his ministers the power they wanted. Each of his loyal officers got a share of his profits, and they got rich through smuggling, drug trafficking, and stealing goods from the markets in Lebanon. The third and most crucial step Hafez Assad did was building a regime in a circular form, and as far as I know, there were 3 circles around Hafez Assad. The first was the family. According to Israeli reports, Hafez Assad gave the closest positions to his closest relatives. His younger brother, Rifat Assad, was the second in command to Hafez Assad and was in charge of a force called the Defense Companies, and then composed of the toughest soldiers in the Syrian army, and they were loyal only to Hafez and Rifat themselves, because on the day the regime would be in danger, the defense companies would have to be called. And in addition, Hafez Assad planned to inherit the regimes to one of his sons, Basel, and later Bashar Assad, but we will get to that. The second circle is composed mostly of the old guard, those who grew up with him within the Ba'athist system. The relations Assad had with them were mostly of a patron-client. Assad made sure that only his men would be in the best positions, and in exchange for their loyalty, they enjoyed being under Hafez Assad's regime because with him they increased profits, had tighter control over the state, and had it stabilized. The third, and one of the most critical circles, is the rich families across Syria. The dominant Alawite families, Druze families, Sunni tribes, and basically the people of the periphery. In every village across Syria were offices and branches of the Ba'ath Party, and they usually took care of the problems of the common people. Assad knew that without the villagers, without the common people scattered across the country, he has no legitimacy. But it also worked extremely good on Assad's favor, because not only he got legitimacy from within Syria, but from the outside world.
In September 1974, Syrian President Hafez al-Assad met Kim Il-sung and told him that he was greatly impressed by the fact that Kim Il-sung had created a brilliant example by applying the Tutsi idea in all fields of social life. Then he conferred the supreme Syrian order on the Korean leader.
In the 1990s, Hafez Assad's health is deteriorating. He is sick more often, he is rarely seen in public eye, and when he did, he appeared much thinner, his hair was completely white, and according to the American envoy to the Middle East, Mr. Dennis Ross, he lost weight drastically. Assad himself felt that he won't have much time, so he sets 2 tasks he must do. One is making peace with Israel, and passing over the regime to one of his sons. About the peace process with Israel, we will maybe talk in a future video, so I will focus on the inheritance. As I said earlier, Hafez Assad had 5 children. Bushra is the eldest daughter, after her Basel, Bashar, Majid, and the youngest Maher. Though Bushra seemed to be the most intelligent and talented of the children, Basel was proven to be some sort of a replica of Hafez Assad. He was a military man, an athlete, and as someone who grew up, he graduated from the military school. So Basel was seen as the best candidate to inherit Hafez Assad, but unfortunately, Basel died in a car accident close to Damascus in 1994. So Hafez calls his second son, Bashar, from London to take on the inheritance and teaches him everything about Syria. Hafez Assad passed away in June 10th in the year 2000, and Bashar was even proven to be more ruthless, brutal, and far less considering of human lives. If you thought Hafez Assad was cruel, wait until you see this. Bashar Assad was born in 1965, and he is the middle child of Hafez Assad and his wife Anisa. As a child and later as a teen, Bashar actually lacked social skills, and many can describe him as shy and relatively humble. Unlike his older siblings, Bushra and Basil, Bashar grew up out of the spotlight of the family and was relatively unknown. And as they grew up, Bashar Assad studied in the Damascus University ophthalmology, while his older brother Basil was studying in military school, getting involved in politics, and to cut it short, Basil was about to inherit his father Hafez Assad. With this fact in mind, Bashar continued his doctorate in London, and there he dated Asma el-Akhras, which eventually became his wife. A few years later, Bashar receives the news. His older brother Basil died in a car accident. So we can safely say that Bashar got the throne of control of Syria, literally by accident. After the funeral, Bashar was summoned back to Damascus and was asked by his father Hafez if he wants the throne after his passing. Bashar doesn't wait for long and agrees. Within a short period, Bashar becomes a battalion commander, quickly graduates from military academies, and later becomes the highest-ranking member of the Syrian army. All of it in a period of 3 years. In June 10th, in the year 2000, Hafez Assad passes away, and Bashar takes the throne of power.
أقسم بالله العظيم أن أحافظ مخلصا على النظام الجمهوري الديمقراطي الشعبي، وأن أحترم الدستور والقوانين، وأن أرعى مصالح الشعب وسلامة الوطن، وأن أعمل وأناضل لتحقيق أهداف الأمة العربية في الوحدة والحرية والاشتراك.
According to Israeli and many Western analysts, Bashar seems like a promising president, but in the end, he came out worse than his father by every term. In the first year of his regime was the Spring of Damascus, in which intellectuals could speak against the regime, criticized Bashar, and many spoke of democratic reforms. But the Spring was more cunning than this. All of those who opposed Bashar finally spoke up, and Bashar actually sent them to prison. In addition, if we talked about the circles that Hafez Assad created to ensure his regime, Bashar Assad totally changed them. The circles were destroyed, and the old vanguard of his father was replaced by people who were loyal to Bashar but came from the high class of Damascus, so they were detached from the harsh realities across Syria. So, with the exception of Damascus, there have been 5 consecutive years of drought. When he comes to power, Bashar Assad was far more sympathetic and supportive of Hezbollah than his father. According to reports in Israel, Bashar Assad enslaved the Syrian military enterprise for the benefit of the terrorist organization in Lebanon, and he gave them everything, literally. Other than AKs and mortars, he gave Hezbollah long-range rockets, which hit Israel's central station in Haifa in the year 2006. He actually gave so much to Hezbollah that he actually forgot his own army, which bound to him directly, and 5 years after the war in Israel, it was put to the ultimate test. One of the most interesting parts of the Syrian civil war was not how it actually began, but how it evolved. The riots of the Arab Spring, which happened around the year 2011, put a test to all the dictators of the Middle East, and each failed miserably. The Egyptian President Mubarak resigned and stood trial. Gaddafi was killed by a mob after he was found hiding. Bashar saw all of it, and he refused to back down. So when the riots of the Arab Spring reached Syria, he doubled down and sent his army and security forces to crush any sort of opposition across the country. Thus began the Syrian civil war. Though the Syrian opposition was split within itself, the opposition managed to gain ground, and for the first time in 48 years, the Ba'ath regime was seemingly collapsing. But eventually, Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah came to help Bashar Assad. Hezbollah and Iran provided the ground troops, and the Russians sent its air force and later the Wagner group to help Bashar Assad. Both sides, the opposition and the pro-government loyalists, committed horrible human rights violation, which includes carpet bombing of entire cities, besieging villages, and massacre either Shia or Sunni Muslims. Around 2018, Bashar Assad seemed to be the winner of the civil war, but had to adjust to being more of a puppet ruler of the Iranians and Hezbollah than an actual ruler, in a country of which became one of the largest narco-states in the world. While we discussed those who actually helped Bashar, it can be said that the Syrian opposition composed of so many forces that often created alliances together and fought the next week. So the first opposition was actually the Free Syrian Army, which composed of officers and soldiers who defected from Assad's army in order to defend the protesters. As the civil war began, they became the main opposition group with different idealism than the Ba'athist regime. In addition to them was a different militant force called the Southern Front, which was supported by America, Britain, and Jordan. The Syrian Revolutionary Command Council was another organization. The split between them actually worked well for Bashar, but also worked for different type of organizations which opposed both the secular regime of the Ba'ath and of the rebels. That's how the Salafist organizations actually came into the picture. Organizations such as the Islamic State, al-Nusra Front, which later became known as Hayat al-Tahrir al-Sham, Jaish al-Islam, and other opposition movements promoted the Islamist agenda to remove the infidel regime of the Ba'ath, but also remove the Syrian nationalists who fought for Syria. Each of those organizations combated for control over resources, not just against Bashar Assad's regime, but also many times against each other. But with the air cover from the Russians and the ground support from the Hezbollah and Iran, Assad have won, until one war, not so far from them, twisted everything. During the war between Hezbollah and Israel, Israel managed to hit very sensitive targets. Banks, high-ranking officials, and the greatest psychological blow was the death of the leader of the terror movement, Hassan Nasrallah. When the Israeli ceasefire agreement came into effect on November 27, 2024, the Sunni organizations, led by HTS, committed a full-scale attack against the loyalists of the government, Hezbollah in particular. And there is a reason for that. As I mentioned earlier, in the later stages of the civil war, Bashar relied on Hezbollah for protection, and the Sunni organizations knew that Hezbollah is weakening because of its war against Israel. In a matter of less than 2 weeks, I still remember that day, the forces of the rebels reached Damascus, and the leader of HTS, Abu Muhammad al-Julani, declared himself as the leader of Syria. But Assad was nowhere to be found. It was revealed a few days later that he was given a shelter in Moscow by the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. So the Assad dynasty came into an end in a similar dark echo of a coup in which the family came to rule. But unlike what many in the West think, the new regime isn't focusing on reconstruction or planning an economy, but rather on something else. As soon as he took power, Giuliani didn't turn much of his attention to reconstruction or invest in a new economy, but rather he focused on two important issues: keeping the regime intact by bringing foreign Muslim fighters to help the regime's lack of manpower, and turn the attention towards those who the regime considers undesirable, the non-Muslim minorities. The first one to suffer were the Alawites who opposed the new regime in Damascus. According to testimonies, forces loyal to the regime entered and massacred the Alawite minority, kidnapped girls and women to be sold in the Damascus markets as slaves, vandalized and burned their sacred halls, and stole property. The massacres stopped due to international pressure. Few months later, the attention of the regime was drawn to the south, to Sueda. Sueda is mostly inhabited by the Druze minority, which has relatives in Israel. Unlike the massacres of the Alawites, Giuliani's forces, mostly composed of Muslims loyal to him, were stopped by Israel, who sent its air force to bomb the convoys of the trucks reaching Sueda. Until today, the Druze of Syria receive support from Israel, but the city is still besieged and serves as a testimony for the horrible Syrian civil war. The situation in Syria is dire, especially for the non-Muslims. But there is always hope for renewal, and the minorities do have hope that one country will literally save them. History judges people harshly, but I think the greatest judgment is how Hafez Assad would actually think of his son. For me, I think it's obvious that Hafez Assad would be very disappointed with his son Bashar, because Hafez Assad wanted Syria to be a leading country in the Arab world. He would have no regrets or problems with Bashar if he continued to kill. No problem with the pile of bodies. He had a problem with the fact that Syria is now shattered without a clear role or future. The legacy of Bashar was for its dependency on Hezbollah and Iran, and Hafez Assad would never go in that direction.